Hello everyone who was joined to us, and today we are going to talk about the spinal cord's gray matter and a basic review of the reflexes. As usual, we have the practical work. Today we will have a lot of work in our notebook and video files. As usual, we have the test on our page in Moodle. It's 9 test functions of the spinal cord in general. And as usual, we will have many links to a video that tell in more detail about the functions of organ and reflexes too. And we will return again to the slide that shows the structure of the nerve system, and we have already moved to the central part and spinal cord, in the certain part of the spinal cord in a gray matter. So that is a reflex to all. What is a reflex? A reflex is a fast, spontaneous, autonomic, unplanned sequence of the actions that occur in response to the particular stimulus. And here we see a general classification of the reflexes, and some reflexes are inborn reflexes, such as pulling your hand away from a hot surface before even feel that it is hot something. Other reflexes are learned or acquired. We will study these reflexes later in a section of the heart nerve system. Just today we will recall them and find their place in classification, but they are associated with the brain, exactly with the brain cortex. As you see, the Pavlov experiments is usually like a simple for these reflexes. Some reflexes are somatic reflexes, which involve contraction of the skeletal muscle, and visceral or autonomic reflexes. And autonomic or visceral reflexes, I hope you heard what the practice called the autonomic nerve system. They have observed some visceral reflexes, this a lot of visceral sensory reflex with the skin pains, place, visceral reflex, and we discussed about visceral somatic reflexes, somatovisceral reflexes, a lot of different. And when integration take place in a spinal cord gray matter, the reflex is the spinal reflex. It's only inborn reflexes. In the brain, there are also centers in the brain. There are also centers of inborn reflexes too. Integration occurs in the brain stream rather than the spinal cord, and the reflex is called a cranial reflex. You see optic nerve, for example, and papillary reflex for brain. It's as usual for doctors to watch what happened with your papilla. So, in the classification now. The following classification of spinal reflex depending on the number of synapses involved: monosynaptic, deep reflex or stretch reflex; desynaptic, negative stretch reflex; and polysynaptic, flexor reflex or withdrawal reflex; asynaptic, with location only with one axon. Sometimes it's called one axon, just axon reflex. And usually we see such drawing of the reflex somatic arc and steps. You have 5 steps in a neural reflex. As usual, step first, it's just physical or chemical charges. Activation of receptor on the surface of the skin, whatever. And step 2, activation of sensory neuron here. And step 3, information processing by postsynaptic cell and then activation of motor neuron, action potential move on the effector, and there with this response of the peripheral effector, and by just contraction of the muscle, and we move the hand. So what we see on this picture, just not so much synapses. It depends on the number of neurons and synapses. We have the time of the reflex. This reflex very quickly moved our hand, so it's a very short way, but sometimes we have a lot of and much synapses, so the time of the reflex will be longer, and we will discuss about this, and even we will see the lab work of these reflexes. So there are complex reflexes with a large number of synapses through much somatic reflexes. You see here polysynaptic reflexes. Much somatic reflexes depend on the consequences. It are voluntary reflexes, and sometimes we have a lot of synapses in it, and our the information from the receptor move in the brain, and is a time of reflex sometimes some seconds. It's a very big time for reflexes. A little more about classification. Clinical importance. Today we watch a video of the experiment and examination of spinal cord reflexes. You know this. Sometimes the doctor just ask you to do a movement, or just do some manipulation with you, and it's very important to know some clinical reflexes and clinical importance for this. For example, superficial reflex, plantar reflex, Popkinski response, and abdominal reflex. Sometimes we need to do deep reflexes like a stretch reflex, and sometimes even visceral. For example, urinary bladder actions at all. So for today we have already analyzed automatic reflexes. We have already analyzed automatic function in the previous practical, and that's it. That's what we are going to look at today on this classification. Today we will have a lot of information about these reflexes. What we have on this picture, somatic reflexes can be tonic or proprioceptive, sometimes we call postural, and like example, stretch reflex. To understand these reflexes, tonic reflexes, we should know muscle spindles. We should understand how build the Golgi tendon organ, and in general how works muscle. So these are synonyms that it's very important to know the structure of the Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindle, and these reflexes are well expressed in animals. Phasic reflexes, as usual, flexion, they are also protective. Extensor reflex, rhythmic reflex, tipping reflex, for example, scratch reflex too, and so that most of these reflexes have no connection in the higher centers of nerve system with the cortex, just the effector as a muscle. And what we have, so where we are, spinal somatic reflexes, and function of the spinal cord is integration. In gray matter we can find the integration centers and most do not involve higher learning centers. The brain remains advanced of spinal reflex activity and can inhibit or adapt it if need. And effectors are skeletal muscle and monosynaptic reflexes, postural, it's Latin, or posture reflex, many scratch reflexes that help maintain upright posture or posture. And posture muscles generally have firm muscle tone and extremely sensitive scratch receptors. We'll talk about these receptors later. Allow for very fine subspecies, and you move on the monosynaptic on the spinal reflexes, somatic spinal reflexes examples. It is the stretch reflex, tendon reflex, flexor withdrawal reflex, and crossed extensor reflex, and all this we will watch today in films. Spinal reflex, scratch reflex, has a least delay between sensory input and motor output, and for example, scratch reflex such as the patellar reflex completed in 20-40 milliseconds, and receptor is muscle spindle. Just let's look at the special case of the scratch reflex, knee reflex, or patellar. I think you know it. There is a special place where we mention it. It when studying muscle. You can watch the practice about muscle. So what we will see here, there are two specific areas in the muscle. First, the muscle spindle here, and the tendon Golgi organ. What for skeletal muscle activity to be smoothly coordinated, proper receptor input is necessary. Two kinds of proper receptors we have. Muscle spindle informs the nerve system of the length of the muscle to maintain healthy muscle tone, and Golgi tendon organs inform the brain as to the amount of tension of the muscle and tendons. So let's look at these organs. So what is this muscle spindles? The receptors in stretch reflex bundles of small specialized intrafusal muscle fibers. So we know that in a muscle we have extrafusal fibers and intrafusal fibers here. Innervate by sensory and motor neurons, and let's look at for the next slide. We see that it's a type of stretch receptor presented in a muscle line parallel to infrafusal muscle fibers, extrafusal muscle fibers. Touch helicocalyx of surrounding extrafusal fibers. So it's intrafusal and extrafusal fibers. And we have here nuclear chain fibers and nuclear back fibers. It is better to see on the next slide. So let's take a look at the muscle spindle, and you see there is intrafusal muscle fibers that don't contract. Muscle spindles are composed of 5 to 14 muscle fibers here, of which there are three types: dynamic nuclear back fibers, and for example motor fibers, and static nuclear back fibers. And usually it is inside of muscle spindle, and here even better we see and what we see, nuclear back fiber, yes, and nuclear chain fiber here, and we have dynamic and static fibers. and it is all approximately 1 centimeter, and here we see the photo of this. So, nuclear chain fibers, primary type 1A sensory fibers, large diameter, spiral around, and intrafusal muscle fibers ending near the middle of each fiber. Secondary type A, type 2, sensory fibers. Sensory fibers, medium diameter and continuous to the central regions of the static back and chain fibers. These fibers centered formation by stretch-sensitive mechanically gated ion channels of the axons. The motor part of the spindle is provided by motor neurons, up to a dozen gamma motor neurons. This activates the muscle fibers within the spindle. Gamma motor neuron supply only muscle fibers within the spindle, whereas beta motor neurons supply muscle fibers both within the outside and the spindle. Activation of the neurons causes a contraction and stiffening of the end parts of the muscle spindle, muscle fibers. And gamma neurons, motor neurons are classified as static and dynamic according to the type of muscle fibers they innervate, and their effects on the responses of the first A and secondary neurons, sensory neurons innervating the central non-contractile part of the muscle spindle. The static axons innervate the chain or static back fibers. They increase the firing rate or 1A and the second efference at a given muscle length. See schematic here, we see this. The dynamic axons innervate the back of the back 1 fibers, intrafusal muscle fibers. They increase the stretch sensitivity of the 1A efferents by stiffening the back 1 intrafusal fibers. So these fibers need for give information for the central nervous system about the function of the whole muscle, like an organ. So next one, excitation of muscle spindle can be excited by 2 ways: scratching the whole muscle, stretching of mid portion of the spindle. Excitation and contraction of the end portion of the spindle without stretching the muscle will also lead to the stretching the central part. Excitation 2. So next organ, next part of the muscle, it is the Golgi tendon organs, sometimes just we say shortly. And what is this? The proper receptors that are located in the tendon to the myotendous junction. So it's a special organ inside of tendon. And here we can find this Golgi tendon organ. It's lie in series with the extrafusal fibers and receive not motor innervation. Without motor innervation, only sensory. They send forth information to the spinal cord, where interneurons receive input from the brain that specifies an amount of force that a muscle should produce. If that muscle's force level exceeds that set point, the Golgi tendon organ inputs inhibit the alpha motor neurons innervating that muscle, which lowers the force produced unless some other mechanism cancels that signal. So this organ is a sensory ending enclosed in a spindle-like connective tissue capsule that lies near the junction of a tendon with a muscle. In contrast to muscle spindles, the Golgi tendon organ lies in a series with skeletal muscles, fibers, and therefore this changes during perceived stretching of the muscle, as well as when the tendon is stretched by the contraction of the muscle. Accordingly, the tendon organ is considered to be a muscle tension receptor rather than a muscle stretch receptor. So that what does this reflex arc? We see, and tapes of this reflex you see, and movement. And what it is? At first, quadriceps strongly contract, Golgi tendon organs are activated here, and efferent fiber synapses with interneurons in the spinal cord move signal. Efferent impulses to muscle with stretched tendon and depend. Muscle relax, reducing tension, and efferent impulses to antagonist muscle cause if to contract. If we must to contract the extensor, we must to inhibit flexor. So, and very often we see this reflex when we visit the doctors. This was one example, but there are many such reflexes, and everything is connected with certain segments of the spinal cord, special segments. And here we see big table. Here we can find the stretch reflexes for different parts of the body, but sometimes we can use not only deep receptors but also the skin receptors too. And here we see superficial reflexes. They are used to diagnose the spinal cord too very often, and today we will see some of these. These are simple reflexes, and now let's move on to polysynaptic reflexes. It just was a monosynaptic, very easy to understand this group, but here polysynaptic reflexes, more complicated than monosynaptic, responsible for automatic action involved in complex movement and walking or running, for example. And here we see next slide. So at first we can control more muscle group, not only one muscle group, more. And for this we need may involve sensory and motor responses on the same side of the body or opposite sides. It's more complete. And same side you see the example stretch reflexes, withdrawal reflexes, and opposite sides contralateral reflexes, crossed extensor reflex, for example. And you know that some tracts of white matter in a spinal cord can move side of the white matter and move in different parts of the cortex, even a cortex. For example, withdrawal reflex, for example, first a simple polysynaptic reflex. Here we must see the work of the antagonist muscle. To contract one muscle, we must relax the other. And we see here this reflector arc and withdrawal reflex example, flexor reflex. Grabbing and unexpectedly hot pain causes pain receptors, you see, and hand to be stimulated. Sensory neurons activate interneurons in the spinal cord, and the site is the same. Just you need to inhibit some muscles and stimulate another. So this reflex we discussed, so I don't stop a lot of time, just move on the other examples. For example, we see the same reflex, but do you remember? I hope you remember that always not one spinal cord segments do action for this reflex, work in this reflex. For this reflex, we always use in general more segments. You see 3 segments, and do you remember the myotomes and dermatomes? In a previous practical we discussed about it, so it is always important how this work. And next, spinal cord reflex, crossed extensor reflex. Crossed, when we change the way from the, for example, left side of the spinal cord to right side, and when we do step or running, is this complicated reflex. We need to coordinate the 2 halves of our body. And what we have for this, we have changed the ways of excitatory, and in this time we have to inhibit some other muscles. It's very complete reflex, and here we see example stepping on a tag. Flexor reflex pulls injured foot away, for example this leg, and crossed extensor reflex strengthens injured leg and supports shifting weight to move weight on another leg. So we need to move excitatory signal for some muscles, and for this time, in this time, extensor muscle will be inhibited. So for humans not so easy, but for animals it's not easy too. As you can see, there are postural reflexes or posture reflexes and locomotion reflex, and in animals everything is more difficult because of the 4 limbs. Not only 2, 4 limbs. In animal it is walking automatism. So inborn stepping automatism is a response to the irritation of the sole of the limb. And here you see allura for movement of horses. These allura are different. For example, a gallop. And here we see some kinds of help, and pace. You know, pace, it's special kind of horses. In general, 2 bit lateral grades they are fore and hind limbs of each side. Move synchronicus, left hand and left force. Right hind, right horse. In most breeds of horses, this piece is considered just like a fault, just a mistake. But central breeds, certain breeds of horses, such as the Icelandic horse or the Peruvian Paso, are bred specifically to show this gait. In other species of animals, such as camels or bears, this is a standard gait, and all animals move very difficult because of reflexes with 4 limbs, not only 2 like for humans. So next one, reflex. You see this kind of reflexes, movement, and So we almost finish our practical, but here is a lot of tonic reflexes for the neck, movement of neck, movement of head, just move head, move up. And today we will watch the video about all these reflexes for animals, how these animals move, and the example of postural reflexes for animals, and this kind of reflexes we will watch the video too. And the second part of our practical, it is a practical work from our notebook, and work 25 is the time of the reflex. Response, answer, character of the reflex, field irritation depends not only on its location on the body surface, but also on irritation force and duration, and its flow and different concentration of acidic, and the force of these liquids will be more in percent. It depends on the concentration of acidic, and here we just have a time of the reflex, and if the concentration of acidic solution will be more, the time of reflex will be less. For next analysis of the reflex arc, and it's just we do this reflex, and should to put some parts of the reflectory arc in your note. Just write here on the page where is effector, where is receptor, and after that a receptive field on the body of frog, and what kind of reflexes we will see after action on the some parts of the body. And next practical studying of knee and ankle reflexes. For diagnostic we will just watch the video to this protocol. And as usual, your homework in book Animal Physiology from Genes to Organism, you should read some pages about nerve system, and your test in a Moodle page function of the spinal cord. So let's start to watch the video to this practical. So first video about posture in animals, and start to watch video, and I just translate. The teacher said that for animals it is very important to move the body when the back is up, and always the head is in a normal state. It's not normal to just to lie on the back side of the body. Only height animals can, like cats, like dogs, can move the back on the land, and the abdominal surface is upper than back. And always we have very strongly programs for each animals, and here we just segmentary of all reflexes, and all reflexes have special localization. And the teacher said that coordination of the limbs should be only in the brain. It's just a work of interneurons which move information in a special motor cortex in the brain. But for some animals, like frogs, we just can move out the brain, and this animal can coordinate reflexes of moving the body, only use the spinal cord. She tried to put the rabbit on the back side of the body. And for this you need to at first move on the back side the head, and after that the body change the position like a head. It's very important to keep the head, only one hand just. After that you see the body move after the head. At first they change the position only head, and after that the whole body move like the head. From the first head, the second the cranial limbs, and then the back side of the body.
Сначала посмотрите, экстрарецепторы туловища, потому что они в норме не раздражаются. Мы их положили, они посылают сигнал для того, чтобы восстановить свое положение. Как от экстрарецепторов идет через восходящие пути спинного мозга к вестибулярному аппарату. Вестибулярный аппарат старается восстановить положение головы, потом восстанавливается положение шеи, потом восстанавливается положение всех мышц туловища. Ну и теперь посмотрим наоборот. А если положим вниз спинкой? Так, вот теперь ваша задача. Помогите мне голову, только давайте мы его не скрутим. Вот так, молодец. Так, вот теперь держите хорошо. Главное.
And keep a head, very important. So the muscles are are relaxed.
Вот это рефлексы позы, рефлексы положения. И посмотрите теперь еще. Если мы повернем голову, я специально закрываю глаза. Зачем? Чтобы он не видел. Он не раздражался, чтобы кора не участвовала. И если, посмотрите, если я сейчас приподниму его, чуть-чуть, раз, тихо, тихо, сейчас успокоится тихонечко. Тихо, тихо, тихо. Так, повернула, смотрите, это лапка разогнута, это согнута. Да? Повернем, может быть, это случайно. Повернем голову в одну сторону.
And you see the position of the limbs depend on the position of the head.
Вот повернулась сюда голова, эта лапка теперь сильнее толкнется, и туловище пойдет вслед за головой. Поднимем голову вверх. Тихонько.
the head up and the limbs up the body at all. So it was the static reflexes, and after that the teacher will show the kinetic reflexes in a movement. Next one video, the video to work 25, the time of reflex, and let's watch. As you see, we take the different concentration of acidic liquid solution. And we just move the leg in a different concentration, percent concentration of this acidic, and watch. So it is the time of reflex. From the action of acidic solution on the skin, and here we see for first concentration it takes 9 seconds, for the second one it takes 4 seconds, and for more concentration, the third solution, it takes just only 1 second. So its concentration is higher and time of the reflex is less. And here you see the protocol table 10 for this lab work, and there we can put all seconds of time for each concentration. And then next, analysis of the reflector arc. You can just write the parts of the reflector arc of this reflex, and then receptive field definition. At first we just move out the part of the reflector arc, move our reflector arc just the part of the skin where the receptors are. And if we put the paper with acidic, just watch and you see nothing. Why? Because of receptors can't generate the impulses, and nerve system just don't know what happened on the skin, on the surface of the body. If we just take a nerve and damage it, And then we take the same liquids, the acidic solution, and remove the leg inside this liquid, inside the solution of the acidic. Nothing happened. Why? Because of the way where the impulses move in the spinal cord. This way just damaged, and after damage of the spinal cord at all, general damage, all reflexes absent. Even if the receptors field are native, even if the nerves are not damaged, so after action of electricity, all reflexes absent. So here we see how important have all elements of reflector act without any damage, and receptors field and the nerves, and especially the spinal cord. So, and next one, it's the end of our practical. We have some video about knee and ankle reflexes, at first for humans and then after that for animals. We need to do the same reflex on the different legs, and usually we put one leg on the another leg. Its next one, it is Achilles tendon reflex. As usual for veterinary doctors, we do this reflex. Just we need to relax all muscles. It's normal reaction. It was the action on the Golgi tendon organ. Just use the tendon of the triceps. And the segments of the cervical part of spinal cord from the 6 to 7. So it was for humans, and next one video for veterinary neurological exam for Lucy. This dog is the name is Lucy, and let's watch the video.
Boxer, and she's here for an exam, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through a neurological exam as the vet would do in practice. So the first thing we want to do, you can tell that she's weak on her hind legs, so you just kind of want to observe. As she came out of her kennel, we saw that she was having trouble placing her feet. It looks like weakness, but at the same time it looks like she's wobbling, so that's different than musculoskeletal. When she's wobbling like that, it's almost like she doesn't know where her hind leg is. So that's a clue that it's neurological. So let's start with her front legs, if you want to come around here. So the first thing we do is something called knuckling. We try to place her knuckles on the ground, and she should fix it immediately. You can see she's barely even letting me do it. So her front legs have good knuckling reflex. It's a postural reflex that they don't like to be on their knuckles, so they like to fix it right away. And you can see that on her front legs, everything's working properly. Now let's try knuckling on her back legs. So here's her right. I do support her belly a little bit so she doesn't fall, and I knuckle it, and you can see that she's leaving it knuckled, and then it's a delayed response. Let me do it again. And, oh, there. So it took a while, right? So that means it's taking a long time for the signal to get up to her brain, tell her that she has a postural deficit in the back, and then come back down and replace the paw. So let's do this side. Same sort of delay. It's not immediate. She knows it's happening, but look, on that one, she's just leaving it. And she tried to fix it, and she didn't even know she hasn't fixed it yet. Okay? She still hasn't fixed it. So it's worse on the left. Sometimes you'll see that, or it's worse on one side than the other. So what this is telling me is that she likely has a lesion somewhere in her thoracic lumbar area that's affecting her hind legs, but it's not far up enough to affect her front limbs, and that's causing some of these postural deficits. Another one that we do is hopping. A lesion somewhere in her thoracic lumbar area. It's happening, but look, on that one, she's just leaving it. And she tried to fix it, and she didn't even know she hasn't fixed it yet. Okay? She still hasn't fixed it. So it's worse on the left. Sometimes you'll see that, or it's worse on one side than the other. So what this is telling me is that she likely has a lesion somewhere in her thoracic lumbar area that's affecting her hind legs, but it's not far up enough to affect her front limbs, and that's causing some of these postural deficits. Another one that we do is hopping. So I lift her other leg, and I drag her leg. Now see how that should hop properly, and so she's hopping properly, that's good. Now I'll do it the other way. She is hopping pretty good, so that's good. She knows that she needs to do that. Now the last thing we're going to do is her reflexes. So if you want to, let me get her on her side. Good girl. Oh, she's a good girl. So now we're going to check her reflexes on her hind legs. I got the reflex hammer here. First one is the patellar reflex. It's reduced, so what we should see is a kick that is a little bit more exaggerated than that. We're seeing a reduced kick. Barely even a reflex there. Okay, well, that was more of a normal one, but the majority of them aren't normal. See that? The majority of them are not reacting properly. Okay, we can do the gastric reflex, which is here. That one's pretty normal. Okay, but when I do the patellar reflex, reduced. You can see that there's one more called the tibialis, and it flexes them at the hock right here, and that one's pretty normal. So reduced patellar reflex, but other ones are normal. Very reduced. Okay, so I go ahead and put. Reflex on this side, wow, there's nothing there. And this this is also the side that we noticed her knuckling was worse. So this is telling me her lesion is right at the lumbar region that innervates this left side. Okay? With maybe a little bit of the right side affected, but look, no reflex at all. Okay, let's do the tibialis, reduced on the tibialis gastrocnemius. I would argue that's reduced compared to the other side. Okay, so I think we know where our lesion is between L1 and L7 on the left side with a little bit of issue on the right as well.